Yes, I may as well. Yes, because it could take a couple of hours. So, you know, I've got not only my watch in front of me, but a clock as well to tell me when the time is getting on a bit. Okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. I can't see you all. I can only see a very small selection, but it's lovely that you've tuned in. I hope you've got a glass of wine or something with you just to relax. After George's great talk last week, it was really fascinating hearing about how Kelvingrove was renovated. We thought it might be relevant if I took you through the idea of going to visit Kelvingrove and a few of the paintings, just 10, to have a look at. It's just to say, in case any of you haven't attempted to go to Kelvingrove yet, you can't just turn up and expect to get in. You will not get in. You have to book online. So you just Google in Kelvingrove Art Gallery, Glasgow, go onto the website, and it will direct you very easily for free tickets. It opens at 11 o'clock in the morning, not 10. And you book a half-hour slot, you know, but you can stay as long as you like when you're in, etc. So they release tickets, I think, every fortnight, and I'm not sure, it might be this Thursday at 12 o'clock noon when they open it up for the next fortnight, and so on. So if you're tempted to go, it's a really interesting time to go because it's deserted. They're letting so few people in at the same time. So you really would have peace and quiet to look round the gallery on your own when you're there. Anyway, this is what Kelvingrove looks like, which I imagine you've all been to many, many times. And you'll know as well probably the history of it. Archibald McLellan, you can see in the upper left there, was the founder of the Civic Art Collection, and he gifted 512 pictures and 11 sculptures and an extensive library and a suite of galleries on Sauchiehall Street, which are known as the McLellan Galleries, to the citizens of Glasgow in 1854. And the following year, we finally acquired them, although we sold most of the library. And we were really grudgingly buying his collection because he had died insolvent. You'll see the wonderful print is a great favourite of mine from the 1901 exhibition. In 1888, Glasgow held its first international exhibition to raise funds for the building of Kelvingrove. And what you can see is the 1901 exhibition. The white buildings, of course, are all temporary and were all demolished afterwards. But you can see Kelvingrove was opened in 1901 to coincide with the exhibition. The space internally was used for displays. It was closed again and officially opened the year later in 1902. And the gallery looks very much as it was pre-lockdown. Sir Roger the Elephant dominating one of the hallways on the ground floor and so on. But I'm going to show you 10 paintings that are definitely on display. There's really no point in showing you some fantastic works that you cannot see just now because you can't even go to Nitshill to see them. So the Renaissance masterpieces by Sandro Botticelli of the Annunciation, upper left. The Master of Moulin, who's a French artist working about 1500, does this of St. Maurice or St. Victor with a donor. Down below, you've got Bernard van Orley, who came from Flanders with his wonderful Virgin and Child by a fountain from about 1525. And earlier in date, about 1508, 1510, we've got the much disputed Titian or Giorgione Adulteress brought before Christ. So these are not on display. So I'm just pointing out these are masterpieces that most certainly should be, but they're not. So what do we have? We've got very few Renaissance pictures. There's 2 Renaissance pictures on display, a small Bellini downstairs, but I'm taking you upstairs. And I should say that of the 10 paintings, 8 of them are upstairs, where the paintings were originally going to be anyway when the gallery opened. The museum was downstairs, the painting art gallery was upstairs and so on. So 8 of them are upstairs, 1's downstairs and 1's on a landing. So this is the first one, and we're doing it roughly in date, just to let you see. This is by an artist whom, if you haven't heard of before, then there's no shame in that whatsoever. Rafaellino del Garbo was born and died in Florence, and he had his main workshop there. And he was trained by Filippino Lippi, who was the son of Fra Filippo Lippi, a very famous artist. Both he and his son were famous, but because his father, Fra Filippo Lippi, died when he was just 11, he was actually put to training under Fra Filippo Lippi's most famous pupil, who was Sandro Botticelli. So if you look at this picture and you think, gosh, that looks a bit like Botticelli, you get lots of gold stars for that. That's excellent. It's just not actually by him, but it's someone connected to him. So Rafaellino apparently was very talented to begin with and very innovative, and it seems, according to Vasari, that he lost his just magic in his mature and later years. This painting I've chosen because it's absolutely standard for a Renaissance painting. Just a reminder, when you're looking at paintings, you're not just looking at an image. You must think of the painting as an object, a 3D object, which it is. It may be a slim object, but it's still an object. And the frame may also be relevant. So always look at the frame and look at the shape of it. This is obviously circular, and it's always been circular, and a circular painting during the Renaissance is called a tondo. And a tondo was never intended for a church. It was always for a private patron's house somewhere. So we know this was for a private patron. And this is absolutely standard image where we have the Madonna and the Christ child and St. John the Baptist. Now, because Rafaellino del Garbo works in Florence and St. John the Baptist is the patron saint of Florence, we're going to see him a lot anyway. Now, how do you distinguish the Christ child from John the Baptist? Well, the standard way of doing it in the Renaissance is to make sure that the Christ child's head is higher than John the Baptist's head. And that is because in the kind of pinnacle and the hierarchy of saints, Christ is obviously at the very top of the pyramid, as it were. Mary, his mother, is second, John the Baptist is third, and then you get to St. Peter, St. Paul, and so on a level below. And so the Christ child always has his head higher. So we can clearly see he's the one with the reddish hair here, and the one kneeling in profile with the rough animal skin. Can you see that brown bit that's around him? Let me just do my pointer to show you. There's a bit of the animal skin, and there it is as well. That is a representation of him, and he's brought his staff, which is in the sign of a cross. So that's indication of that. We've got two angels there, one on either side to balance out the composition, because the composition should look balanced on either side. That was absolutely standard for this kind of period, 1490s into the 1500s. One angel is holding open a piece of music, which is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The other angel helping to hold John the Baptist. The babies are really good at standing and supporting themselves. Mary is identifiable easily because she's wearing the colours that are associated with her, the red, white and blue. The white of the veil for her virginity, the red for the blood of Christ, her son, and the blue because she's often associated with the sky and the sea. And in this case, can you see there's a wee star on her blue cloak? There we are. That is the star of Ave Maria Maris, the Hail the Maria of the Sea. So she is here represented in that mode. The Christ child is standing on a book, and that book is always the holy book, the Bible. So it's the word of God. But you should also be aware of symbolism in the background. Nothing is accidental and nothing is there without a purpose. So adding to the narrative here, we've got the rocks behind the Virgin's head, just slightly to the right-hand side. That is the reference to God creating the earth, the heavens and the earth, and the permanence of the rocks. We've got a tree behind her because she is fruitful, but the more interesting tree is actually just above the angel here. Can you see it there? Can you see my pointed arrow? Yeah, great, okay. So that is the tree of Jesse, that's a tree of knowledge, that's a tree that will eventually be cut down and made into the crucifix on which Christ will be displayed. So all of these elements are there, so just let you see that very quickly. And the frame is in the design of a Renaissance frame, but is not original, so it's just been cast from that. But what's really interesting about this picture, look carefully and you will see the underdrawing of it. So the piece of poplar wood would have been smoothed down. There would have been layers of gesso, which is gypsum, layered on top and smoothed and smoothed. Then a full-scale drawing of the design called a cartoon on paper would have been laid on top of it, and a needle would have been pricked through the lines of the design. And then charcoal ground into dust was sprinkled on top, and then the assistants would lift off the paper and you'd get lots of little dots round, say, for example, round the Virgin's cloak here. And all you do is you get a brush with some water and you join the dots. And then the paint goes on. And the paint goes on by building up in layers. But you see John the Baptist, who's not as important as the Christ child or Mary. So in the contract for this painting, presumably the owner has said, I'm not prepared to pay full money for you to do it, but I don't mind if the assistants do part, but make sure you keep the Virgin's face and Christ Jesus as pure as possible, and you're doing that. So these are assistants who have done this, and they've done it rather shabbily, really. They've cut corners and the paint has thinned over time, and now you can see very clearly the rounded lines to help model the figure. So that's something to look out for in this. Number two very famous painting. It is the greatest painting in Kelvingrove's collection. So it may not be your favorite, but it is undoubtedly the best painting that we have. It is one that you'll all recognize, Man in Armour, dating from about 1655, so quite into maturity for Rembrandt's career. Born in Leiden in 1606, he comes to Amsterdam seeking fame and fortune about 1630. In 1632, he does the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp, which is a sensation, and everyone's talking about this new talented artist, and he gets commission after commission. 1642, he gets his most famous commission, which we just call the Night Watch, which you can see up above. And in 1652, he actually gets a commission from someone living in Sicily, Don Antonio Ruffo. And this Sicilian has heard about this amazing Dutch artist and writes to him and says, I would like a painting, if you don't mind, of Aristotle and Homer. Can you devise a way of doing a painting of that? And Rembrandt's replied to say, yes, this is what it will cost. They haggle over the price, and he eventually sends off the painting you can see down below, which is in Washington now, this painting of Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer. And we know that 2 years later, about 1655, he writes again to Rembrandt and he says, that was a great painting. I'd like one exactly the same size and the same format, and I'd like it to be Alexander the Great. So the question is, who is represented in A Man in Armour? Could he be Alexander the Great? If he is, he may not be the painting commissioned by Ruffo, but I think we'd have to leave that open a little bit just now. We really don't know who he represents, if he's Athene, the goddess of war. Is it Rembrandt's only surviving son called Titus? That's been suggested, who modelled for this. The answer is no, it's not. Titus was in his teens at this point. This is a much more mature face that you're looking at here. We really don't know. Is this Achilles? That's some other suggestion. Alexander is quite possible, because in the profiles in the coinage that we have of Alexander, he is shown in profile with a drop pearl earring that similar to the one you can see here. So there's a bit of mystery about this painting. It has clearly been extended over time on all sides. So if I just point out, the most visible sign is a line going right down there. Can you see that? And then along here, and then up thinner this side and along there. So at some point, this picture has been extended, possibly in the 18th century. It's a fabulous picture, but it was painted, if it's 1655, which we think it probably was, the date was visible many, many years ago, then it's just before he is declared bankrupt the following year in 1656. So by this time, he's bought this really large, expensive house in Amsterdam, in the Jewish quarter, and he's filled it with things that he buys in the market as items he might want to draw and so on, and he's overspending. So he is heading for an absolute disaster, and by this time he may have known in 1655 that not enough money was coming in, although he was getting commissions, to pay for all the things he had bought. Two things to look out for is the impasto technique that was making his name for some people who loved it, but was not fashionable at the time. Over the years, his technique gets broader. He shows the brush strokes much more easily. I show you a wee detail on the upper left. You see where the white pigment, the lead white pigment, has been used, and it's actually been applied on with a brush and even with a palette knife. That stroke down there is a palette knife stroke. So, so have a look at the impasto, because it was becoming increasingly unfashionable in the Netherlands. And that's why he lost a number of commissions. But also we know that it's a genuine Rembrandt because he had started painting on the canvas before he got the commission. And this lady here in the X-ray that was taken many years ago is basically here. Her head's here and her body's coming down there. And he must have been working on this canvas, and then he got some commission and decided that maybe that wasn't going to work out anyway, so he just paints over her. So it's quite nice to think there's something underneath. Henry Raeburn. This is Raeburn's famous and beautiful painting of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Nutter Campbell of Cayley. That's how you pronounce what looks like Cayley. That's Cayley. Nutter was one of the family names, so that's why it's in. It has kind of silly connotations for us now, but it was an acceptable name in those days. It's by the great Sir Henry Raeburn, knighted a year before he died in 1822 by King George IV. He was born in Stockbridge, which is part of Edinburgh now, but was in the outskirts. There was a small village. He was orphaned at an early age, but he was given a very good education in Edinburgh, in the free education. He trained as a miniature painter, but not as a full-scale painter as we know him today. And we have not one single drawing surviving by him. Almost all artists will do preparatory drawings, but he does not seem to have done so. It's a fabulous painting here. It was inspired by Gainsborough's The Morning Walk of a number of years earlier. So this is Robert Campbell and his wife. She's Margaret Montgomery. And in 1794, his father died. And with some of the inheritance that was left from the family, he decided about 1801 to buy an estate. And it was the estate of Cayley, which is in Inner Leeson, which about 2 miles from Peebles. Some of you might have been to the gardens there. We went just a number of weeks ago, in fact, to have a look at the gardens, and I was hoping to see the house, but the house no longer exists. So this beautiful painting shows the skill of Raeburn at the height of his powers, about 1805. This is what the house looked like, but now it's just an area of grassed land that it is there. It was knocked down. It took them 20 years to build the house, the paddocks, all the outhouses and the estate houses as well. And then they had financial problems. I've looked at this painting for years and greatly admired it, and really until recently never thought to question where the family money came from. And sadly, I have to tell you that it came from a slave plantation in Grenada in the West Indies. That's where the money came from. But I have a wee story to tell you very quickly about this painting, because not long after I came to Kelvingrove, the fine art department, my boss said, right, today's a special day because Jimmy the Gilder has finished off a frame. He had been working on it for 3 years, and he had finished off the frame for this great painting. And I remember very clearly going to stand in the gallery where it stands today, in fact, and it was hidden by a sheet, you know, the unveiling of these things. And we all stood in a row ready to be amazed. And he pulled the sheet off, and this fabulous frame appeared. And I don't know what my boss was thinking, but I was thinking, I can hardly see the painting because the frame is so bright. And I was looking at my colleagues just as subtly as I could, and they're all looking wide-eyed, and we were all thinking the same thing. When was my boss, who's 5'2", like me, going to mention to Jimmy that he should have tinted down the gold to make it look antique? And we were all waiting there for a few minutes, and she never said it, and she's never said it to this day. Well, not when he's been there. If I can explain, Jimmy was between about 6'3" and 6'5", a big burly man. And originally I was really quite intimidated by him, but when you got to know him, he was a really great guy, and it was a masterpiece what he produced. But to this day, it hasn't even darkened all these years later, and it does dominate the painting. So look out for that. That's in the Scottish Gallery, and to the left of it is Thomas Faed's famous picture, The Last of the Clan. Thomas Faed came from Gatehouse of Fleet, and he had 2 brothers and a sister who all became famous artists, although he became the most celebrated of the family. Before his generation, there was no artist in the Faed family at all, and 4 of them all became well-established artists. Thomas Faed became a Royal Academician in 1864. His older brother John became a Royal Scottish Academician. His brother James became one of the most eminent engravers of paintings in the Victorian era, and his sister Susan was also an eminent painter. But Thomas Faed was by far the most successful, and this is his most famous painting. Now you can look at this and say, well, this is not to my taste, it's sentimental, it's Victorian, and it's soppy, and we're not interested. But if you were standing in 1865 at the Royal Academy, you were not thinking that. You were thinking of the Highland clearances, and you were probably thinking, I know my friends or my family who've all emigrated as a result of the clearances and of the famines that were happening in Ireland and so on. So this was a really dramatic event for people in the Victorian era. And we know that this was the 3rd painting in the history of the Royal Academy exhibition that needed a barrier and a policeman at it to move the crowds on. So they actually hired a policeman to stand at the side of this painting and say, move on, to the crowds, because people stood and wept in front of this picture. I presume they hired extra cleaners to soak up the tears on the ground and so on. But it is a very moving picture. This is a remarkable one. So yes, it's Victorian, and yes, it's sentimental, but my goodness, it packs a punch. And it's a brilliant painting. The different expressions of the individuals is very marked. We've got wonderful details of still life that I show you down there. And I have a quote that was written by Faed that accompanied the painting when it was exhibited. And it runs like this. When the steamer had slowly backed out and John McAlpine had thrown off the hawser, which was the rope, so he's the man with the red shirt, we began to feel that our once powerful clan was now represented by a feeble old man and his granddaughter, who, together with some outlying kith and kin, myself included, owned not a single blade of grass in the glen that was once all our own. I'm feeling cheerful just reading it out. It's a really powerful painting, but it's also, why I'm choosing it, very brilliantly put together. So let me show you it again. And the way that the Victorians would have read this picture is the way that we've forgotten how to read the picture. And I'm going to show you how this picture is so well constructed that your eye never leaves it. It never goes too far off to the left or to the right or up or down. And it's always contained. So the way you're going to read this picture, if you relax in front of it and just let your eye wander, I'm going to use the color blue to show how he's unified it. Your eye will be picked up by the froth of the water in the foreground here. Can you see my mouse? And you're going to take that diagonal of the rope. The diagonal will lead you into the composition and lead you up to the red shirt of this man, and then you notice he's got blue trousers on, and that vertical and the curve of his back leads you to a blue ribbon on his hat. Do you think a man like this would actually ornate his hat with a blue ribbon? The answer is no. So this is an artistic device. So you've come up here, round onto that blue ribbon, and your eye will then pick up a little touch of blue there, and then the blue sleeves of this lady, and then you follow up to the blue ribbon that goes right round her hat and brings you curving round here. You then get some blue of the sea here that leads you, because of the fencing, along to this figure with blue in the scarf of her head. And then this old lady happens to have a blue ribbon there on her hat. And next, or almost next to her, is this young lady with a blue flower on her headdress. So from there, we come to this figure, the grandfather. Now, because emigration could be very expensive, sometimes only one or two members of the family would go, but sometimes you were offered free passage, but only if you weren't too young or too old. So the grandfather is too old. Here he is, sorry. The granddaughter is too young. And you come along to him and then look at this blue bonnet coming at a diagonal right down to the granddaughter with what? A blue ribbon in her hair. And that line takes you along the fencing to this man wearing the blue, which we think is Thomas Faed himself, depicting himself in the blue jacket. And then we come down through a bit of blue here, down to the wonderful still life here with touches of blue and the blue in the pheasant's head. And then it's the same blue of the skirt of the granddaughter. And so we follow that line, and there we are at the start of the hawser there. So taking us back again. So you never go out the picture. And that's how your eye, if you relax in front of the picture, will read it. So it's very cleverly done. Now, that was a very detailed picture. I'm going to show you what I personally think is the most shocking, outrageous picture in Kelvingrove, and it's Claude Monet's Versailles of about 1880. So it's on the same level as the other pictures. We're in the French gallery now. We're just going to look at a few paintings in the French gallery. Claude Monet, of course, very famous artist. Everyone's heard of him. Born in Paris, he was to eventually live in Giverny, which is a beautiful place to go and visit. But before he goes there, he's staying for a while in Versailles, which was on the River Seine. He had been staying in Paris, but it was just proving too expensive for him. So he had moved out to the suburbs. And because of the railways, it was easy for him to get between Versailles and Paris without taking out too much of his time. 1880, this is an important time for him. And this was probably done in the summer of 1880. In 1879, in September of that year, his wife, Camille, had died after giving birth to two sons. He had not always been overly kind to Camille. He wasn't always tolerant of her. And there were mixed feelings about this, but he, without a doubt, missed her terribly. By this time, he's sharing lodgings with the Hoshedi family. And Monsieur Hoshedi had been a banker, but there had been a banking crisis and he had lost a lot of money. So the family, they had 6 children. They were all living together in the same accommodation at Versailles. And Madame Hoshedi, who was to go on and marry Monet a number of years later after her husband died, she helped look after Camille during the last few weeks of her life. So this painting is one of the first Monet does after he comes out of the great gloom that he had for many months after his wife's death. And it's a very bright picture. It's one of a series that he did on an island called the Ile Saint-Martin on the Seine, overlooking this little place, Versailles, that no one else had heard about, and we probably wouldn't have heard about it if Monet wasn't such a famous artist. In 1872, he painted the picture you can see down below, which is Impression Sunrise, and exhibited it 2 years later in Paris, along with his friends Renoir and Sisley and Pizarro, etc., in an exhibition, an anonymous exhibition. But one of the critics had taken the title of Impression Sunrise and called them the Impressionists, and the name stuck. They were quite happy with that name. So that was painted in 1872. This is 1880. So why do I say in 1880, when Monet is just starting now to make quite a good living from his painting, why do I say this is outrageous? I actually find it outrageous looking at it every time I go to see it. Because unlike the paintings I've shown you where you don't see the underpaint, apart from the very first one, you don't see the underpaint. You prime the canvas before you paint on it, and you usually use a kind of beigey color for the priming of the canvas, and then you paint over that. In all parts of this painting, he has left areas of the primed canvas. Now, this is a detail of that, as you can guess. Do you see that beige color there? And here, all over here, and behind what are meant to be trees. All that is left exposed. It's outrageous. These trees are nowhere near finished. And look at that, the beige color, all of that is the primed canvas still exposed. And even down here near where he's painted his signature, he signed it, so he thinks it's finished. We've got that. But the most outrageous thing about this painting is that some of it, he hasn't bothered even using the brush. This is the era of the invention of the paint tube. So where's my paint tube? We all know what paint tubes look like, right? These have just been invented in leather pouches. These have come, and all he has done for those red lines is he's taken the top off and he's put it up to the canvas and he's squeezed. And he squiggled the squeeze and squiggle, squiggle, squiggle. And the annoying thing is, when you come into the French gallery, this is facing you through the central door. And when I ask my students, what do they represent? Everyone knows they represent poppies. There's no doubt about it. They represent poppies. But he hasn't even used his brush to define the poppies. He has just left that. So this, I would say, is the most shocking, outrageous picture in the gallery, but a remarkable one, right at the cusp of Monet's career when success is just about to find him. We've got Van Gogh's painting here. We'll have to go a bit quicker. This is the Blut van Windmill in Montmartre, painted in the summer of 1886. And this is a turning point, like Monet's, in his career. He has only been painting for a few years, and he's just completed the Potato Eaters at a place called Neunen in northern Europe. And he's very proud of this painting, but I think anyone looking at it will see how crudely handled the figures are. And that was the criticism at the time, quite definitely. So, but he's very proud of this, but look at the earthen colors that he's used. He's had a bit of training, but he wants to do his own thing. Well, that was in 1885, but in March 1886, he all of a sudden decides he's going to join his brother Theo in Paris. And he writes to him to say, meet me at the station in Paris, I'm coming. And Theo only gets a letter literally the day and rushes to try and meet up with his brother, which he does successfully. Theo is an art dealer, and under the counter, his particular art dealer is offering some impressionist paintings for sale. So Vincent has not seen them in 1885, but when he arrives in Paris, he is shown them by Theo, and indeed he sees the last impressionist exhibition, which was held in 1886. And his eyes are open to color. So I love the transformation in less than a year between these two paintings. This one is a small canvas, but he's painting the Bloot van windmill, which was one of the 3 last remaining windmills on the hillside overlooking Paris. Montmartre we consider part of Paris now. It wasn't, it was separate. So there was countryside between it. And it also had these cottage gardens the other side. That is a wooden platform that was laid out, and steps were led up to it. And from there, you had a fantastic view over Paris, which was being transformed at that time. This is the time of Baron Haussmann devising all the grand boulevards and things. So it must have been a great place to go and visit. So this picture is important because it is a part of Impressionism technique. It looks like an Impressionist painting. And yet a year later, while he's still in Paris, less than a year, probably about 9 months later, when he's painting the great art dealer, as we know him, Alexander Reed, from Glasgow, who had come to Paris to work at the same art dealers and shared a studio for a few months with Vincent and Theo van Gogh. He has changed the style yet again to the style of the Neo-Impressionists, and they were Seurat and Signac, and they used little flicks or points of color, dots of color on the surface. And you can see the flicking technique of Alexander Reed, which shows what an amazing development he's made literally within a matter of months. So both of these are Kelvingrove, but it's this Impressionist picture that I think is so transformational. Now, that was 1886, and so is this. So at exactly the same time as Van Gogh has discovered Impressionism, here is great Sir James Guthrie from Greenock, who had trained as a lawyer but decided he actually wanted to be an artist. Here he is. He also is going through a crisis, a change in his art. He had started to be an artist in the early 1880s. He traveled abroad, but he also met up with lots of the other Glasgow boys. So we've got Henry, Hornell, Lavery, Walton, and so on, people like that, Kennedy as well. And in 1882, down below, we've got his Highland Funeral, which was well received at that time. But the other pictures were not very well received. The pictures were inspired by French art and also in later years by Whistler. This painting here was him painting through a crisis. In 1885, he was actually thinking of giving up art altogether. He wasn't selling his pictures. He wasn't breaking through into the Royal Scottish Academy or anything. And he really genuinely thought he was going to give up. But then a new friend on the scene called Hornell suggested to him he come down to Kirkcudbright and stay with him. And they could spend the summer painting either together or just meeting up. And that's exactly what he did. And he chose a local man called Willie, we don't know his surname, who features in about 3 of the Glasgow Boy pictures. And he produces him so remarkably well. Now, he didn't always paint in these dark colors. To Pastures New was done in 1883 in Crowland, Lincolnshire, and we've got a much brighter palette. But in 1886, he returns to the simpler, more direct image, and this is one of the absolute best pictures in Kelvingrove. It's just stunningly direct and honest, not prettified at all. And it was the absolute point where he changed from giving up art to deciding art is something he must do, and he went on to be the president of the Royal Scottish Academy, moved to London and had great fame and fortune there as well, painting the royal family and so on. So he was a great painter, and this is at the turning point. William McTaggart, very quickly, the Paps of Jura from Machrihanish. McTaggart came from a tiny wee place called Arros, which is near Campbelltown on the Mull of Kintyre. He was the son of a crofter, and he understood very well the crofting families who had been forced to live in a different type of landscape environment. And he loved the sea, and there is no better painter of the sea in Scottish art, absolutely none, than McTaggart. This is a large painting, and this is not in one of the galleries upstairs. It's halfway down a stairwell, and it's facing you. It's not far from the last painting I'm going to show you, but this painting here is the Paps of Jura, and it's late on in his career. When he was younger, although he was born in Campbelltown, he went to Edinburgh to train at the Trustees Academy. And he came out inspired by the Pre-Raphaelites, Millet, and particularly Millet. And his spring painting of 1864 is typical of his colouring and his style of early painting, where the figures dominate, but there's a landscape. And then as each year goes on, the figures get smaller and the landscape becomes bigger. And it's not just the landscape, it's the seascape. By the time of 1902, when he's already an RSA and very well known, he's remained in Scotland. He has his house in Edinburgh, but always comes back every summer and autumn to Machrihanish, and he paints directly on the beach, and that's what I love about this picture. This is a photograph of him in 1898. So he's not actually painting the canvas I'm showing you. He's painting one of almost equal size. It's not quite as big as the one we've got. And that's a photo of him on Machrihanish Beach. And he had, I think he's had something like 14 children from 2 different wives. And one of his sons, his elder sons, can you see his legs there? His son is on the beach holding up his arms and holding the canvas in place. Because we all know when we go to the beach, the wind never blows at all, does it? So to make sure the canvas didn't fall over, that's what's happening here. I just love this photograph. I've had to crop it a bit, but it shows him on the beach. But I love this painting because it's really the only painting in Kelvingrove of a seascape where I stand in front of it and I genuinely hear the sea. And I defy you to stand in front of that for the moment and not hear the sea. So that's on the landing. Look that one out. We've got a little Picasso. It's the smallest picture that I'm going to show you. It's really remarkably small, just about 13.5 inches high and about 20 inches across. It's obviously an early Picasso of 1901. Picasso had been born in Malaga, but the family then moved around, and then he went to Barcelona and studied art there. And in 1900, he had a painting exhibited in Paris. So he and his friend Casagemas, whom you can see in the photo down here. Picasso's the smaller figure on the left, and Casagemas is the one on the right, the tall one. He and his friend, they had met in Barcelona, went to Paris for a little while, and then he decided to come back home, and Casagemas came with him over Christmas. But when they went to visit his family, Casagemas' behavior was a bit outrageous, and he left and went back to Paris. And Picasso stayed on with his family and then went to Madrid and came back to Paris, but came back after he'd heard of the terrible suicide of his friend. His friend had had a failed relationship with a lady called Germaine, and he decided to shoot her and kill himself, but whether he decided only to threaten her is not clear. She ducked down, she didn't get shot at all, but he killed himself. So that's when Picasso's paintings change into the blue period. So this is on the cusp of the blue period. He comes back to Paris. His family has spent all their savings on sending him to Paris in the first place. So when he comes back, they have no money to support him, and he has very little money. So he soon realizes if he paints small pictures, small canvases, or on board, some of them are on board, these are more appealing. And this could be one of the paintings that was exhibited in 1901 in the summer. This probably done in the spring. So it's done the same kind of time as William McTaggart's, but it's actually very different in outlook. If you think Pablo Picasso in later years couldn't draw, well, he certainly could in his early years. At 16, he's painting his mother. Do you see the lower left painting? He's only 16. That beautiful, sensitive portrait is there. And of course, we think of Picasso associated with Les Demoiselles d'Avignon of 1907, which was a truly earth-shattering painting. When it was finally revealed, it wasn't revealed to the public in 1907. It was about 1915, 1916 before he did show it, because his friend said, don't do it, it will kill your career. Do not do it. So he didn't. But he's, if you think that is dramatic, then probably his most famous painting and worthy of it is Guernica from 1937, about the Spanish Civil War. That's well in the future. This is the young Picasso. He doesn't know he's going to become this icon of the 20th century. But this little painting has a great deal of charm and has children in it. And we do know that he loved children. He loved wives as well, but he loved children. Finally, the picture, well, you knew it had to appear somewhere. So this is the most modern picture I'm going to show you, Salvador Dalí's Christ of St. John of the Cross. It is undoubtedly our most famous painting in Kelvingrove, and it is rightly so, a very, very famous painting. And we are very blessed to have it, because when we acquired this, we acquired something along with it, which I'll explain in a minute. Salvador Dalí, obviously from Spain. He was to come to Paris in 1925 and meet the great Picasso at that time. In 1929, he becomes one of the leading figures, the most notorious figure probably, of the French surrealists. And he becomes very celebrated, but he also goes off during the war years to America, to Hollywood. He's feted, and it kind of goes to his head. He becomes a showman, I think. But in the 1950-1951, he starts a series of religious paintings. And this one was shown in a gallery in London in the summer of 1951. And what we know about this is that it's very unusual. It was definitely inspired by the drawing by the Carmelite friar St. John of the Cross, a Spanish friar, who made this one and only drawing, apparently in his life, of a vision he'd had of Christ ascending to heaven. So that's the drawing that you can see up above here. Christ, and yet he was looking down from heaven at Christ. So we know Dalí saw this and was very admiring of this, and he decided to take that idea and run with it. Originally he was going to have blood pouring down the body, but he decided against that very wisely. So there's no blood at all, and that's what makes it so striking. The body is perfect, and it belonged to a Canadian stuntman, Russell Saunders, who'd been a diving champion and then moved into stunt work. And he was a stuntman, for some of you who like your films, for Singing in the Rain, for Gene Kelly. He stunted for him. Alan Ladd, some of you remember Alan Ladd? He was a very small, he was about 5'3" in height. Russell Saunders, you know, is 6'1", I think, but apparently he's and Steve McQueen in his last years he stunted for him. Anyway, he was actually hung up. He was trussed up for 20 minutes at a time, not with nails in his hands, but with ropes to get this very dramatic effect. Dalí said later, you know, when he became so famous, that, oh, I was inspired by cosmic drawings, and that may well have been absolutely true, and he actually did a cosmic drawing for the man who acquired it for Glasgow, Dr. Tom Honeyman, who was the director of Glasgow Museums. He was the one in 51 who saw it in a London gallery. It was up for sale for £12,000, and Honeyman started to meet Dalí, and the two of them got on famously. He was invited to Dalí's home in Portligat, very near where he was born, in Figueras in Catalonia, and the two of them had a great friendship, and he was persuaded by Honeyman not only to lower the price to £8,200, but he said, yeah, okay, I'll throw in the copyright, which usually stays with the artist. And Honeyman said, that's really great. And certainly when I started in the art gallery, people were divided whether they loved this picture or hated it. But in the fine art department, it didn't matter if you loved it or hated it. What mattered was the copyright fees for this painting was more than for all the other paintings in the gallery. And we're talking about 10,000 paintings in total. This picture has appeared in every book on Dalí that you can imagine. So it still brings in a lot of money. It's inspired also by Louis Lenain, a French artist. That's the figure that's inspired by Louis Lenain, the one at the boat. Velasquez's figure seen from behind is inspired there as well. It was torn and damaged in its time, but it's been repaired, and it still has a very dramatic effect, a wonderful effect. And it's always worth going to see. It's in a small area upstairs, too small for it, but it's still a very, very impressive picture. And that's the 10. And I've gone far too long, very sorry. But these are the kind of paintings I would suggest you go and have a look at. And why not visit Kelvingrove if you haven't during lockdown? It's a nice experience to go to it and just see the pictures that you like again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maureen. That was so interesting. And I'm going to unmute Gordon, who wants to just say a few words, I think. If you can, Gordon.
I didn't know I was going to do a few words, but here we are. Yes, it's my turn. I think maybe in a fortnight's time, because I think we have a meeting next week. Is that right, Dave?
Yes, we've got a congregational board.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a fortnight's time, and I will go for quantity rather than quality. We've had quality tonight, both in the presentation and in the subject matter. I will go for quantity rather, and you know, the quality stands up. So it'll be a whiz round Sicily photographically, and I hope you can join us then, and I'll do my best to have a presentation ready for then.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I remember when the Salvador Dalí came to Glasgow. And I went with my parents, and there were queues for it.
Yes.
You queued up to see this new painting. And I remember all the controversy was because Glasgow City Council disapproved of Dr. Honeyman spending so much money on a painting. So
yes, that's right.
Every time I look at it, I can see my mother and father beside me. So
that's nice. That's nice. Yes, lots of people have memories of it, and it wasn't just that it was a lot of money for a painting. It was an enormous amount of money of a painting by a living artist. It was a really large sum at that time. So
even then, I thought it was beautiful. The blue of the sea.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? Yes, the colouring.
Beautiful blue.
It wasn't just the council that were upset. The Glasgow School of Art students were up in arms about it.
Oh, really?
Even the Presbytery of Glasgow wrote a letter of complaint.
That's right.
There was a lot of controversy about that painting in its day.
Yes.
But with the benefit
one of the art students was a person called Alistair Auld, who was my boss at Kelvingrove. He became the director of the gallery. And in the wee video they have, you know, he's laughing and saying, I signed the letter saying this is outrageous. So he admitted that he might have been wrong in that, you know, looking back.
big enough to admit that he was wrong. Good for him.
Yes, oh yes, he was a lovely man, yeah.
Well, once again, Maureen, that was fantastic, and thank you very, very much for spending the time presenting that this evening in your normal professional way. It was very, very enjoyable. We have recorded the programme, so if any of your friends want to see or hear this programme again, tomorrow it'll probably be up on the YouTube channel, the Orchard Hill YouTube channel, and you can ask your friends to see it.
Yep.
So I think that is us. We're back in 2 weeks' time for Gordon, and without further ado, I think it's good night from me. Thank you once again to Maureen, and good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Maureen.
Good, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Right, I don't know
Yes,
where I am.
thanks,
though.
Dave.
And then there was me.